It's late October, 2025, 1 year until the midterm elections. The government is shut down again. One party controls the White House, the Senate, and the House of Representatives. Yet, basic governance has ground to a halt. The other party? Largely invisible, seemingly paralyzed, offering little beyond press releases and procedural objections. Meanwhile, Americans are taking to the streets. The No Kings protests have spread across the country. A grassroots rejection of concentrated power, executive overreach, and a political class that seems to have forgotten the word republic. This is Ethos Trek. I'm Sera, and today we're asking the hard questions. What happens when the opposition refuses to oppose? When do citizens stop waiting for heroes and become the movement themselves? And what does the Constitution actually demand of us in moments like these? Let's start with what we know. As of this recording, the federal government is in what they are calling a partial shutdown. And by partial, they mean Congress is still getting paid, the White House is still getting paid, including the cabinet, Pace is still getting paid. Maybe the people for this stupid ballroom? Don't know for sure. Everyone else? Not so much. The party in power, controlling all three branches, cannot agree internally on a budget. Factions within the majority are warring over spending priorities, policy riders, and ideological purity tests. The result? Federal workers furloughed, services suspended, chaos dressed up as principle. Now, you might say, but Sera, this is what happens in a democracy. Disagreement, negotiation, compromise. And you'd be right, except we're not seeing negotiation, we're seeing brinksmanship. Governance by tantrum. Here's where it gets, let's go with complicated. The opposition party, the Democrats, have a constitutional role of being a check on power. Yet their response has been muted, reactive, tactical, maybe. But strategic? Nah. Not even inspiring. So let's be clear about what we're witnessing. A failure on two fronts. The majority is failing to govern despite having every lever of power. The minority is failing to provide a compelling alternative vision. And the American people? We're left holding the bag. Let's talk about the Democrats. Because if you're listening to this podcast, there's a good chance you lean left. You believe in progressive values, and you're frustrated. No, you're furious that the party that's supposed to represent you seems to be asleep at the wheel. Here's the truth. Being in the minority is hard. You don't control the floor schedule. You can't unilaterally pass legislation. Your power is limited to procedural delay and messaging and coalition building. But that doesn't mean you're powerless. Think back to the Tea Party movement in 2009 and 10. Republicans were in the minority. They didn't control Congress, but they showed up. They disrupted town halls. They primaried incumbents. They built a narrative that the Obama administration was overreaching, and they mobilized their base. 2 years later, they took back the House. Now, I'm not endorsing their tactics, nor am I endorsing their ideology, not even a little bit. I still think Walker was a dork. But I'm pointing out that they did something. They didn't wait for permission. They didn't wait for the perfect conditions. They organized, they fought, and they won. So where's that energy now? Where's the Democratic version of that insurgency? Because right now, What we're seeing is a party that seems more interested in not making mistakes than actually doing anything. A party that is afraid of its own base, afraid of being too progressive, afraid of being too confrontational, afraid, period. And fear is not a strategy. Let's shift to the streets. The No Kings protests. If you haven't been paying attention, here's the short version. These are decentralized, and the data says largely youth-driven. But there were people of all ages. These demonstrations are pushing back against executive overreach, unchecked presidential power, and what protesters see as an erosion of democratic norms. The symbolism is potent. No Kings is a direct callback to the founding ethos of this country, a rejection of the monarchy, a rejection of tyranny, of rule by fiat or executive order. It's a reminder that the Constitution was written specifically to prevent the concentration of power in one person or one branch. And here's what's compelling. These protests aren't just anti-Trump or anti-Republican. They're anti-establishment, period. There's a deep frustration with all our political institutions. So what does this tell us? It tells us that people are ready for something different, ready to act. But they don't see a political party that reflects that urgency. They don't see leaders stepping up. So they're stepping up themselves. And that's both inspiring and dangerous. Inspiring because grassroots movements are the lifeblood of democracy. Dangerous because without direction, without structure, without a path from the protest to policy, that energy dissipates. Let's ground this in the Constitution. Partly because if we're going to call this podcast Ethos Trek, we need to talk about first principles. And it's kind of my thing. The framers designed a system with checks and balances, precisely because they didn't trust concentrated power. They didn't trust kings. They didn't trust demagogues. And they didn't trust the people to always get it right either. So they built redundancy into the system. Congress checks the president. The courts check Congress. The states check the federal government. And the people, through elections, through protests, through civic engagement, check everyone. But here's the thing. Those checks only work if people use them. Right now, we have a Congress that's failing to check itself, a minority party that's failing to provide meaningful opposition, and a judiciary that's increasingly seen as partisan. That leaves us, the people, we the people. The Constitution gives us tools. The First Amendment protects our right to assemble, to speak, to petition the government. Elections are the ultimate check. And in between elections, we have recall efforts, ballot initiatives, and the power of organized civic pressure. But none of that matters if we're disengaged, if we're cynical, if we've given up. Okay, enough diagnosis. Let's talk solutions. Let's talk strategy. Because if the Democrats aren't going to lead, then we need to lead them. Step 1. Primary the cowards. If your Democratic representative or senator is playing it safe, if they're more worried about losing their seat than fighting for your rights, then primary them. Support challengers who will actually show up. Politics is downstream of culture, but it's also downstream of consequences. Make it clear that inaction has consequences. Step 2, build local power. National politics gets the headlines, but local politics is where the work gets done. School boards, city councils, state legislatures, That's where the policy happens. That's where you can actually make a difference. And when you build power locally, you create a bench for future national leaders. Step 3, connect the protests to policies. The No Kings movement is powerful, but it needs demands. It needs calls to action. Specific, achievable demands, constitutional amendments to limit executive power, campaign finance reform, voting rights protection. Turn the energy of the protest into legislative agenda. Step 4, tell a better story. The right is really good at narrative. They tell simple, emotionally resonant stories about freedom, tradition, and American greatness. The left, we tend to lead with policy papers and fact checks. Great, but that's not enough. We need to tell stories about what we're for, not just what we're against. Stories about community, about dignity, about a country that actually lives up to its ideals. Step 5, don't wait for permission. This is the big one. Don't wait for the Democratic Party to get its act together. Don't wait for the perfect candidate. Don't wait for the media to cover your issue. Organize now. Register voters now. Run for office now. If you're considering that option, there will be a link in the description box below to an NPR podcast about running a successful campaign. Build coalitions now. Because 1 year from now, we're going to have an election. And if we want results, we need to do things differently. Look, I get it. This is exhausting. The shutdowns, the scandals, the endless news cycle. It's tempting to tune out, to focus on your own life, to let someone else deal with it. But here's the thing. There is no someone else. It's just us. And if we don't do this, if we don't organize, if we don't fight, if we don't hold our leaders accountable, then nothing changes. The framers didn't give us a perfect system. They gave us a repairable one, a system that depends on active, engaged citizens. So the question isn't whether Democrats will show up. The question is whether you will. 1 year out, let's make it count. This is Ethos Trek. I'm Sera. Stay vigilant, stay engaged, and as always, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep thinking critically. I'll be back in a few days.